to another video. It's been so long since I've made one of these because I took a little break. It was a little bit of an unplanned break. I just got really busy with work and other things, so I didn't want to rush the videos and I decided to just wait a little bit until I had the time to sit down and enjoy it and do it right. And that's what we're gonna do here today. Obviously, if you saw the title, you know this is gonna be another study with me. And for today, I chose Frida Kahlo as my topic. Now, when I make these videos, I always pick an artist or a painting or something that I'm really into in the moment. I usually go for either people that I have just recently come across some of their art online, or I've seen somebody else talk about it and just piqued my curiosity, stuff like that. But today's topic with Frida Kahlo is something a little bit more personal to me, just because she's been my favorite artist for such a long time now, and I actually have made videos about her in the past. Not so much a study with me, but more just painting, like trying to recreate one of her paintings and talking a little bit about her, because I had just bought a book. I actually have it here. I just got this book and it's about her life and her artwork, so I got really excited and I made a video back then. Like when I first started reading the book, I didn't even finish it. It's a pretty incomplete video and I could not let that be my one Frida video, so I decided, you know what, it's time. I mean, it's been a while anyways. I think I did that like over a year ago, so it was time to revisit her. One thing that I have noticed though is that with Frida, there's a lot of controversy, and with reason. This time, I am gonna focus mostly on her art. Obviously, I will bring up stuff about her life because that is obviously very relevant to her art, but a lot of the things that are controversial about her, I decided to leave out, like her politics and all that. I mean, not leave out, like obviously. You can't separate that from who she was, but that's not the focus of today's video, but more about her art, her struggle with her health, and the stuff that I personally find very relatable to my situation, which is what makes her one of my favorite artists, just because I feel like, obviously to a very different extent, because I'll go into it later, but she went through a lot. I feel like some of the things that she went through in a way relate to things that I either went through or I'm going through, so in that sense I relate to her. And yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this one. I had a lot of fun doing all of the other ones in the past, but this one felt more like a personal journal at some points. Like, I went from studying about her and taking notes about her to journaling about why I love her so much. So yeah, this is gonna be a really fun one. Also, like always, I am going to be mentioning a couple of my favorite paintings by her and why. I am going to be talking a little bit about her life, her upbringing, and a little bit about what a lot of her paintings had to do with her personal life. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. And I made a bunch of notes. I think this is the most extensive notes I've ever written. Like, this is my first page, and these are all the ones that I wrote about her. I wrote 7 pages about Frida Kahlo, so you can say that I really enjoyed it. Frida Kahlo had a very, very difficult life. It was full of suffering in more than one way. Obviously, there was a lot of physical suffering, a lot of emotional suffering, mental, in every way possible. She was born in 1907 and her father was German, her mother was Mexican, indigenous Mexican, which is something very relevant in her art. You can see in a lot of ways how the influence of her parents' culture, they were very present in her paintings. Since she was a child, there was a lot of difficulties in her life, starting with the fact that she contracted polio when she was very little, which affected one of her legs for the rest of her life and will be the source of a lot of the pain that she went through. Also, she says that she had a very lonely life, even though she had siblings, but her relationship between them and her parents, especially with her mother, was a little bit difficult. She loved her father and she was mostly close to him, but in general, she said that her life was very sad when she was a child. Later in life, she decided that she wanted to study medicine, and that is where she met one of the people that will change her life forever, for better or for worse, and that was Diego Rivera, who she later married. But then that's when the biggest event that changed her life happened, and that was her accident. She was in a car accident where a trolley crashed against them, and her accident with the trolley would leave her with so much pain for the rest of her life. A lot of injuries, some of the most painful ones were to her back, to her spine, and that would leave her with a permanent damage that would eventually turn into multiple surgeries and leave her wearing a corset for a long time, which she later had multiple. She had some plastic ones, some steel ones. So because she was bedridden for so long, she had a special easel made where she could paint from home, and a mirror that was placed above her bed so she could see herself. That was the beginning of a lot of her self-portraits. She was confined to be at home, which also meant that she was working on smaller paintings of still life and whatever she could see around her. Because of that also, she started to include a lot about her personal pain and feelings, a lot of the symbolism used in her self-portraits, showing how she felt about her health and her current situation. Something really interesting about her is that she is completely self-taught. She taught herself to paint through art books and copying other artists' styles until she eventually developed her own, which again starts with things that I personally relate to. And because of this, because of how she was in the process of teaching herself how to paint through other art, she had a little bit more of a very constricted art style. But we can see little by little how it starts to develop into more of her own personal expression. That's when she started doing more self-portraits, family portraits, and friends paintings that she could kind of put a little bit more of herself into them. Eventually, she healed enough that she was able to leave bed and go back to a little bit of what was her previous life. That's when she started meeting back with some of her friends of the Communist Party in Mexico, which started her political journey. And one of these friends that she started meeting with again was Diego Rivera. When they met again, she asked him what his opinion was on her art style and if he liked it. And after he validated her art, it was over from there. They started a relationship even though he was married at the time, which kind of set the tone for how the relationship would be for the rest of time. They eventually got married, and their friends and family were not really in favor, except for Frida's dad, because Rivera did have money that he thought would help his daughter, because obviously her journey was going to be very expensive, the medical expenses. So in that sense, he was in favor of that, but everybody else kind of knew that this relationship was going to be very difficult. And going back to her art, she started to lean more towards the more traditional Mexico art and including more of her native side into it. Even on her personal attire, she started to dress more like the traditional dress of the woman in Tijuana at the time, which was also a way for her to show her feminist side, because the way that she would dress would represent a community that was said to be a matriarchy and anti-colonialism. In 1930, her and Diego moved to San Francisco, and they were pretty popular. They were the popular art couple, but he was a little bit more well-known. He was more famous, and that led to her feeling a little bit less respected in the art community. There were even some articles that talked about her as an artist's wife who also paints and dabbles in painting. And with reason, that led her feeling not too great about the experience living there. So she wanted to return back to Mexico, and eventually she did. Diego Rivera was not happy about that. He felt like he had to leave everything behind because of her, but also because of her health, she needed to go back home. They still kept going back and forth to the US and Mexico, but whenever they were out of her home country, she felt so homesick. She always wanted to be in Mexico. That's where she felt happy, that's where she felt at home. And eventually she was able to just permanently stay in Mexico, even though Diego was not very happy about it. Because of that, their relationship started to get a little more difficult. And Diego Rivera had a lot of affairs. Frida did too, but it was very open and known that the two of them were having affairs and just were not having a great time together. And there's even a quote of her that says, "There have been two great accidents in my life. One was the trolley and the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst." Throughout all of this time, her health had been constantly declining. She had already had multiple surgeries for her back and for her foot, at some point even having to amputate some of her toes, and leaving her hospitalized for a long time. Eventually, when she finally made it home, that's when Diego asked her for a divorce, and they were divorced for a year before they went back together. But in that time that they were divorced, she went back to La Casa Azul, which was her previous home, and that's where she started working on more of her bigger paintings and kind of like putting more of her own identity into her paintings, because I guess that time that she had apart from him, she was able to find herself a bit more, but also, I guess, show more of her crisis with her self-identity, just because Diego Rivera had been such a prominent part of her life that it's almost as he became part of her as well. That, combined with her physical health, it sent her into a really bad state of depression, and it's something that eventually she would never come back from. It was just too much having this difficult relationship with the person she loved and having her body fail on her, that even at the end of her life, it's still debated whether she terminated her own life or not. One of the last paintings that she worked is also very telling of her feelings and her mental state at the time. She was working on a self-portrait called Self-Portrait in a Landscape with the Sun Going Down. And it's an unfinished painting, which is kind of a parallel of what she was going through in her real life. But one of the reasons why she decided not to finish it is because she said the painting contained a vitality that she no longer possessed. And in her diary, she wrote one last quote before she passed away, and it was, "I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return. Signed, Frida." The next day, she would pass away. After she passed away, her house was turned into a museum by Diego to celebrate her life. I think that she was such an amazing artist and such a complicated person. I think that it's so important, obviously, for everybody to see the personal life with the art, because the art is a reflection of your personal life. But I think specifically in her case, it just really touches me because her art is so full of symbolism. It's so full of images that at some point she was even referred to as a surrealist. And I really love about her art that sometimes it can be so literal. With her art, she's telling you very directly what is going on. And I am going to be showing you some of my favorite paintings, the meaning behind them, and the symbolism and what they mean. My first favorite painting of her, of course, is one of her self-portraits. And I think, honestly, most of them are gonna be self-portraits. But I would say this is one of my favorite. It's the self-portrait with a thorn necklace and the hummingbird. Here, it's really interesting that the hummingbird on her neck is dead. One of the things that it symbolizes is the vitality and the resilience of the hummingbird, but it's right next to the thorns and the blood that showed the pain that she had gone through in her life. And it's like showing a contrast between her body and her mind in a sense. Another of the paintings that I really enjoy a lot is the heart. And this one came on a very difficult time for Frida because it was a time where Diego Rivera, her husband, had an affair with her sister. And even though they both had multiple affairs during their marriage, it was nothing compared to the betrayal that she felt from Diego and her sister. In this painting, there's a lot of symbolism going on. One of them is that she obviously shows how much pain she's going through. One of those things was the heart on the ground, how big it is, the bleeding heart, kind of showing how much pain she is currently going through. How the stick is piercing where her empty spot where the heart should be is, but also with the lack of hands, she's kind of illustrating how helpless she felt. Like, there was so much despair that she was going through, and she showed it so beautifully through this painting. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about her art, is just not only how she was able to express what she was feeling going on, but how you could feel that feeling as well. Like, when you see that painting and you understand what it is about, the story behind it and the symbolism, it's very hard not to feel pain as well. It's one thing to understand it, but you can really feel it. I love that so much about her art. There are so many other paintings too that the symbolism itself is just so beautifully done, but I don't think I can even share them here on YouTube because this is not me. This is how social media works. Some of her art might be a little bit too explicit, and I would encourage you to go see it yourself, look it up, because even though there is a lot of, sometimes, and this serves as a trigger warning, there's a lot of gore sometimes in her paintings, but I think it just makes it so real. Her life was full of it. Her life was full of pain. It was full of a lot of what you see in those paintings that make it hard to see, make it hard to watch, but it's something that it was inevitable for her. She couldn't just choose to not see it, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so beautiful, how explicitly she painted it. Because if you really want to understand what you feel like, you can't just choose to not look at it. You can just choose to pretend she went through pain but avoid the ugly parts of it. Now, that being said, I am gonna go back to some of the ones I can show you. And these ones, I think I've said this about almost all the ones I've mentioned so far, but again, this one is definitely one of my favorites, and that is the two Fridas. I think this is also one of her most famous ones, at least that's one of the ones that I've seen the most. Even before I really got into learning about her and studying about her, this is one of the paintings that I've seen so many times. And this one, it shows two sides of who Frida Kahlo is. This one was made shortly after she divorced Diego Rivera, and like the previous painting, that brings a lot of more meaning to the painting, knowing the context and what was going on in her life. One of the interesting meanings behind these paintings and the difference in the clothes that she's wearing was that one of these Fridas represented more of her European side and the other one represented more of her Mexican traditional side. And the heart on the Frida with the white dress, the one that represents more of the European side, you can see how it's bleeding out. And in a way, it's her way of saying that her European side is dying out of her. Like, she's now at this point more of her indigenous Mexican side. And also, it shows how in the hand of the traditionally dressed Frida, she's holding a little picture of Diego. And even though he's made her go through all of this pain, she still holds him. She still cannot fully let him go. Also, it's said that he was one of the people that inspired her to dress more in her traditional clothing, because he felt like these traditional Mexican dresses for women is what the Mexican women are supposed to wear, and when they don't dress like that, it's them giving in to colonialism. So there's also that point of it. I like how both Fridas are still connected by an artery, because even though one is dying out and they both are different sides of her and showing a different meaning to her, they're still connected and they're still the same her. They're holding hands, it's still both part of her. And another one of her self-portraits that makes me feel, I feel a little conflicted, is self-portrait Diego on My Mind. Now, this painting is absolutely beautiful and I know for sure that I absolutely love it. The conflict comes on Diego, on her forehead, because I personally, and I feel like most people will agree, I don't like the man. He was just not a good person. He did not treat her well, and it's sad to see her devotion for somebody that treated her like that. But it is also something that is real, it's understandable, it's something people go through, and they had such a complicated relationship. He was so so much a part of her that she made this painting kind of to show that. One of the details on this painting is her dressing. She's wearing a Tijuana costume that not only Diego loved, but it also comes from the region in Mexico where matriarchal traditions are still alive even today, and they kind of show the dominant role of women. Yet, he's still the main thing in his mind. This man that treated her so wrong, it's still painted on her forehead. It still won't leave her mind. These roots that simulate like a spider web, that it kind of show how she's trying to trap her prey, which is Diego. So it's, and this is my opinion, it's a little bit of a contrast, which is what I feel like conflicted about, like what is this really trying to say. Because even though with her traditional clothing and showing this matriarchal and feminist idea that she's showing, this man is still controlling her, and even though she in her mind she's the one trapping him, he's really the one in control in a sense. So it's complicated, her feelings are complicated, and I think that is why it's so important and valid to analyze everything about her and what she was going through with her paintings. And I really like how real it is, you know. It's not something that makes sense when you are trying to be very black and white and critical about somebody who is proclaimed herself as a feminist. It's very easy to say, how can you be a feminist when you're letting a man control your life? But that's just simply not how humans work. And I do appreciate that we can see that through her art. How she can still be a woman that believes in feminism and is trying to live her life by it, but we're not perfect, and obviously the things that we're going through in her life just did not allow for her to be fully who she wanted to be. And Diego was one of them. Like she herself said in her quote, her accident and Diego were both really, really bad for her. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I had a lot of fun. Like I said, this one was so important for me personally. Like I said, I did so much journaling after studying this because it led me to kind of understand myself a little more, my art, why I paint what I paint, and what goal I have with what I want to express through my paintings. Obviously, I don't think I'll ever be Frida, but I'm just saying I definitely have her as an inspiration because some of the things that she went through, well, not exactly the things she went through, but some of her situation in life, like living back home and the feeling of loneliness that she went through when working on her self-portraits, I can relate to that. But yeah, it was such a fun process and I hope that you enjoy, and I will see you next time with another artist. Bye bye!